É uma região inóspita, habitada apenas pelo povo inuí, por ursos polares, em pleno Ártico. É que por lá há um lusodescendente a estudar os efeitos do aquecimento global, uma pesquisa científica financiada pela comunidade portuguesa em Toronto, no Canadá. Nesta edição conhecemos Andrew Medeiros.
The Arctic's one of the biggest question marks that there is. We don't know a lot about what's happening in the northern environments. We just know that if it does change, there will be consequences that will be felt globally.
Ocupando cerca de um terço do território canadiano, a área conhecida simplesmente como o Norte ocupa um lugar cada vez menos periférico no imaginário e identidade nacional dos canadianos do Sul, que em anos recentes têm investido na sua exploração científica e económica. Entre estes novos exploradores, encontra-se o biogeólogo Andrew Medeiros, que há 10 anos lidera uma equipa de cientistas dedicada ao estudo do ecossistema do Ártico e à sua sustentabilidade face ao rápido desenvolvimento industrial na região e ao aquecimento global.
In the summer, the Arctic is a water world. Infiltration is not possible due to the permafrost horizon, so the water will stagnate throughout the environment, both in terms of rainfall and snowmelt. And so you end up with landscapes that are dotted with thousands upon thousands of lakes.
So my research concentrates on examining changes to aquatic systems. And we do most of our work in northern environments because we can understand how the beginning and end point and continuation and trajectory of these systems may be altered due to some kind of outside disturbance, including environmental change. So my students and I go to lakes, rivers, and streams throughout the north to examine the chemistry of the water, the landscape, the vegetation that may be surrounding that water resource, as well as the biology, the biotic component of what's living in those aquatic systems. The deposition to these lake environments is kind of like a storybook which tells us about past environments. And that gives us a really good indication, a marker of how these systems might respond to future change.
Is there anything in there? That's a fairy shrimp.
And so our research has really found that these aquatic systems operate in very narrow thresholds of existence. The species that are there, the composition of water that are in these systems changes very easily to any kind of outside disturbance. So if you start adding something to water that interrupts the natural life cycle of the biotic organisms that live there, they're not particularly happy as it is because of the cold temperature regimes, so they're much more susceptible to these disturbances, both in terms of changes of temperature as well as pollutants or toxins or differences in water level or increased harvest in the case of fish. So our research has really made a lot of these linkages that didn't exist before. When I first started doing my PhD, it was in an area about the size of Sweden in central northern Canada that not a single other researcher had gone to for any kind of water research at all. You're working in an area in which there's a long-standing tradition of history and culture that is changing very quickly. It's changing so quickly that there's very little adaptation culturally and environmentally. The largest misconception about the Arctic is that it's this place devoid of anything, an ice and snow world. And people forget that this is somebody's home. The North is home to the Aboriginal peoples that have called it home for generations and generations and generations. They are Canadian. They identify as being Canadian.
Filho de pai luso-canadiano e mãe descendente de várias etnias, Andrew teve poucas oportunidades para explorar as suas raízes culturais, em parte devido ao facto de seus pais terem emigrado de Toronto para a Flórida enquanto criança. Aí, Andrew foi confrontado com a segregação racial ainda dominante no sul dos Estados Unidos, onde a sua suposta herança cultural acabou por lhe dar a oportunidade de estudar ciências na escola.
The only reason that I'm here is because I left Canada and was exposed to a racist southern United States curriculum that had already had mechanisms to deal with prejudice and segregation.
We're picking insects in the name of science.
Pyramids and
Amphipods.
One of the funny things is you're always asked to check a box. What's your cultural identity? What's your heritage? And those boxes are based on political and sometimes ridiculous means of what you should check as a box. And it was quite offensive for myself and my family to check a box when I went to school in the United States. So they'd check it for you, and I was often labeled Mexican. Ironically, by checking a box, somebody put me into a scientific outreach community for a program in the United States for underprivileged minority kids because somebody checked the box that I was Mexican. I've been at several different academic conferences where politicians literally laughed, and the whole room laughs, how there are no Inuit or First Nation or Aboriginal professors to be able to give money to research their own environments. And it's something that is quite disgusting, really, when you think about it, because there are very few initiatives to have diversity in education and promote diversity and promote science as an opportunity for children that are expected to just be hunters, gatherers, workmen, or servers. And that is something that the Portuguese youth, especially in Toronto, are dealing with. Are you told to go to school and learn auto body or get a job, drop out and get a job? And for the longest times, my father would actually tell me that I wasn't going to be successful because I didn't have a job. Even while going through school, going through my graduate education, he wanted me to be a waiter or a hand at his work rather than continue to go through school, and that I was a failure because I was actually going to school and learning science and not being part of the family and the expectations of culture, I guess, from their viewpoint. And that's what the youth in the northern communities are experiencing right now. Word success isn't addressed towards having an education or future, because that would be the white person's expectation, or that's the southern expectation, and that's not what your culture and identity is. And so I started working with a lot of the northern communities and children and community-based groups to integrate science and opportunity and show them something about their own environment that they hadn't actually been exposed to before. Understanding and researching as a concept was not there and is not presented in schools in the same way as you would get in a southern education system. And it was pretty amusing to me to be able to go to places like Churchill, Manitoba, and find a diversity of people, including a family of Portuguese immigrants that had established the only restaurant in town named Gypsies. So that was quite the surprise for me. And basically what drives us to continue with research is to be able to integrate something that benefits people in northern communities. And so having these kinds of community relationships is particularly important for me, and it's something that I'll keep doing.